Hello, it's Cried here with a breakdown for fists. Other than claws, this is the other twinned weapon class, which makes you dual wield a single fist when two-handing. I'm very sorry to say that the 1.07 nerf did nerf the status damage of fists, just like it did to power stancing weapons, which is a real shame honestly. Fists and claws could really have kept the old status MVs in order to be more of a consideration as status weapons. Let's start by taking a look at the range of the fists. Surprisingly, a lot of the fists share the same short attack range. To start off with the different movesets, I want to point out that there are two main ones. One type deals mostly strike damage, while the other type deals mostly standard or pierce damage. While the Cipher Pata has a pierce label, it is important to note that it is pure holy damage. Thus, this pierce thing doesn't really affect it, as it doesn't do any physical damage. Though, it does share the same pierce moveset. I will be focusing on the difference in their two-handed moveset, as this will be the most common usage of fists. Another note is the Grafted Dragon cannot be two-handed. It has the one-handed strike fist moveset. These are the two-handed movesets of the Cestus, Spike Cestus, Iron Ball, and Star Fists. These are the two-handed movesets of the Clinging Bone, Qatar, Veteran's Prosthesis, and Cipher Pata. As for the heavy attack, there are actually two kinds for the strike fists. This is the heavy and charged heavy attack of the Cestus and Spiked Cestus. This is the heavy and charged heavy attack of the Iron Ball and Star Fist. This is the heavy attack of the Pierce Fists. Next, let's take a look at the weapons they are. Starting with the unique fists, we have the Clinging Bone, which actually has a regular weapon art you can get from Ashes of War, Lifesteal Fists. Aside from its fairly long length as a fist, which doesn't really matter because every other weapon class is longer than this still, it really doesn't have a selling point. It is easier to just run a buff like Scholar's Armament on a heavy or keen infused regular fist and run Lifesteal Fist. You will be doing more damage. So yes, to put it simply, this fist is trash. Next comes the Veteran's Prosthesis, which has a unique Ash of War, Storm Kick. It is truly such a shame we don't actually wear this on our legs, which can really make it unique. I actually feel quite dumb swinging this with my hands. Now a question you might have while looking at the optimized stat distribution is why are we investing into dexterity more, when it scales better to strength? The Veteran's Prosthesis' lightning damage portion only scales to dexterity investment, which actually makes investing into dexterity first the better option. Personally, I don't find Storm Kick to be outstanding. Yes, it does quite a bit of poise damage, but so can a lot of other ashes for a much shorter cast, so I don't find the ash to be that strong. Cipher Pata is purely holy damage that scales from faith, just like its straight sword counterparts, the coated swords. One thing interesting about Cipher Pata is it weighs absolutely nothing, but sadly the Blue Dancer charm only works with physical damage, a real shame honestly. While the weapon art, Unblockable Blade, shares the same name as the coated sword's weapon art, this skill actually lunges you forward instead of a sword swing. No surprises to optimizing this weapon, just faith, and even more faith. Finally, we have the Grafted Dragon with its unique weapon art, Bear Witness. When I first read the name of this weapon art, I immediately googled it, and the community certainly did not disappoint. Anyway, here are the stat recommendations for the fist. You can technically invest heavier into faith if your focus is the Ash of War, but I don't think the Ash is that great, especially as a spammable. Then again, this fist isn't great as a melee weapon, so I guess investing harder into faith can also be the play, if it isn't your main weapon. One thing about Grafted Dragon is, you can't two-hand it, even though the two-handed motion values are in the files. I suppose this is due to thematic reasons, so you actually only have access to its one-handed moveset, or its power stance moveset. Furthermore, you can actually offhand the fist and the weapon art will overwrite your main hand's weapon art, just like how shields work. Very useful for cosplaying Godric. Really wish the weapon art was a bit better though. Moving on to the regular fists. We have the Iron Ball, Star Fist, Cestus, Spike Cestus. Yes, I realize it too. They just gave the fist spikes and gave them extra base bleed and base attack for a tad bit more weight. And the Katar. The only piercing movesets for the regular fists. Most of the fist users will immediately go for Star Fist or the Katar if they do want the counter damage on the pierce attack, as those are the most obvious options. Unless they prefer the moveset of the Spike Cestus, of course. Today is about attempting to beat Star Fist as the base choice, and one of the possible options might take a turn and surprise you. Starting off with the heavy infusion, Star Fists come out on top. The only fist that scales better to dexterity is the Katar. Do remember that two-handing fist only makes them paired weapons, and doesn't give it the 1.5 times strength multiplier. Here is the 80 strength investment. The heavy infused Star Fist is probably what most people will be running for raw damage, unless your stats are so high quality gives you more AR. These are the stats for the fire infusion. An infusion I do not suggest for fists, as the low AR doesn't make split scaling favorable. These are the stats for the keen infusion, which I only suggest for the Katar. These are their stats at 80 dexterity. This is the lightning infusion for fists, and once again the 80 dexterity versions. Quality infusion, as usual, no surprises. Not good at all at meta PvP levels. This is even more true as two-handing the fists doesn't give them a 1.5 times multiplier, so it is going to be even later into the game before quality's AR surpasses either the heavy or the keen infusion. Flame and Sacred infusions are typically chosen because you want to invest into Faith for incantations. However, because you use fists to two-hand them, it often means that the only incantations you will run are stuff like Golden Vow or Flame Grant Me Strength. In fact, running buff incantations isn't such a bad idea since fists have low weight. This means that you don't need to invest as much into endurance. And one of the best ways to further push fist damage is through the use of buffs and incantations. Royal Knight's Resolve applies to the whole attack, even if the damage source is split into two. For example, the jump attack of fists. Here, I have a simple demonstration of using Royal Knight's Resolve on a heavy infused Star Fist, plus Raptor's Black Feathers for the armor with a Claw Talisman. I've also buffed myself with Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. As you see, you can do very high damage with just jump attacks. Another option is to run the Axe Talisman and do charged heavy attacks, as the charged heavy attack of fists come out quick enough. Magic Infusion suffers from the same issue as Flame and Sacred. Unless you're running an Ashe that scales to intelligence, I don't suggest this infusion, especially because you also have access to the Code infusion. I've outlined the Katar in red because this is the only weapon I'm using the dexterity distribution for. All the other weapons are using the strength distribution for Code. The Spike Cestus actually prefers a 3-way split, but even when optimized, the AR is not much higher. It means that this weapon doesn't have a good scaling on Code infusion, so Star Fist actually wins out by even more versus other infusions like Sacred or Heavy. This is the Poison infusion. Once again, Katar is using the dexterity distribution, while the other fists are using the strength distribution. And this is the Bleed infusion. Remember, Bleed infusion overrides the base bleed of the weapons, so you're not getting a big advantage out of the base bleed on the Spike Cestus or Star Fist. As for the Occult infusion, this is an infusion that is particularly interesting for fists. Occult infusion is generally used for weapons with base status effects that scale to arcane. For fists, the two weapons are Spike Cestus and Star Fist. Even at a glance, you should immediately see the difference in base bleed, which is a result of a vastly different arcane scaling for the two weapons. The Spike Cestus usually loses by a fair bit of AR. However, on the Occult Infusion, it only loses by 3.3% AR for 12.2% more bleed. Furthermore, the two fists have the same range. So for the Occult Infusion, I actually suggest running the Spike Cestus over the Star Fist. The rest of the time, unless you prefer the Spike Cestus' heavy attacks, you're better off running Star Fists. These are their stats at 80 Arcane. As you see, the conclusion still holds. Alright, let's do a quick summary for Fists. The Clinging Bone is crap. The Veteran's Prosthesis has a unique weapon art, but this weapon art is honestly more for style than practical usage. The Cipher Pata is probably your best unique fist in terms of actual usability for PvP. It weighs nothing and scales fully to Fate, while only having holy damage. For PvE, endgame bosses are strong against holy damage, so you're better off with something else. The Grafted Dragon cannot be two-handed, and its skill can be used on your offhand like a shield. Very cool thematically, but honestly not that strong practically. For practical uses, you want to be looking more at the regular fists. The Cestus and Iron Ball are simply inferior versions of Spike Cestus and Star Fist. If you have a particular preference for the type of heavy attack you want, obviously pick by that. Otherwise, the Spike Cestus beats the Star Fist on Occult Infusion, while the Star Fist beats it everywhere else with strength scaling. The Katar also remains an option, as it is more dexterity oriented, has a slightly longer range, and does piercing attacks on moves like its jumping attack, so you can get counter hit damage. But it does not have base bleed. Overall, to nobody's surprise, Star Fist is probably your best bet for most fist builds, but just keep in mind that the Spike Cestus does better on Occult, while the slightly longer length and piercing moveset of the Katar can make a difference in PvP. Like and subscribe, and if you want to support my channel, please buy my fantasy novel in the description down below, which will also allow you to request a topic from me. See you next time.